Good evening, everyone. This is a meeting of the Citizens Advisory Committee for Capital Expenditures. Today is Thursday, February 27th, 2025. We have a full plate this evening. You've been following, as we've been following over the last several weeks, we've been going through the capital needs inventory for the city, various categories. And tonight we have two presentations. One is on city buildings, particularly with the courts, and the other is for the city fleet. And joining us this evening, we are honored to have the presiding judge, Chris McGraw of the 22nd Judicial Circuit. And I think he may have be able to introduce some of his cohorts over the courts. So without further ado, Judge McGraw will be presenting some of the needs that were on our critical needs list pertaining to our courthouse facilities. I don't know how you want to proceed. I can pull this stuff up on screen, or are you going to present? I mean, however you want to do it.
I believe attending with me is our court administrator, Amanda Sadoko, and Lewis. Lewis is our facilities manager, and I believe Amanda's put together a little presentation for us.
Okay.
Yes,
I can share. You want to share screen? Yeah.
Yes, let me. Okay, are you able to see that? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so I just want to begin with a thank you to the Citizens Advisory Committee for giving us their time to present on the court's needs. I am Amanda Sadamka. I'm the court administrator for the circuit court, and I know Judge McGraw and Lewis can provide additional input and answer any questions. So just as a overview of the court, we are a state court with a 22nd Judicial Circuit, court of general jurisdiction. We hear that hears various kinds of civil and criminal cases. Our buildings are historic buildings, and I can briefly go through those. I mean, basically, the mission of the court is to provide all people visiting the court open, fair, efficient, and an independent system for the advancement of justice of law. And so our courtrooms and our buildings are open to the public during business hours, and we do service jurors, witnesses, litigants, just to give you an idea of who is going through our buildings, in addition to court staff. We do have 3 buildings. Really quickly, I'll just do a quick overview. We have the Clyde S. Cahill Courts building that was recently renamed. It was formerly known as the Civil Courts building, and a lot of the paperwork the committee will see it references civil courts. That's on Tucker Boulevard. This building generally hears criminal, civil, family court cases. It houses, in terms of staff, judges, clerks, court staff, sheriff staff, and the public administrator's office, but is also occupied by the general public, litigants, witnesses, and jurors who are summoned for jury duty. The Mel Carnahan Courthouse is just across the street on Market. That also handles criminal and civil cases, houses court staff, as outlined with CCB. There are other non-court city departments housed in that courthouse, and as well occupied by general public, litigants, witnesses, and jurors who are summoned. And the third court building.
Let me just interrupt you for a second. Sure. As to those first 2 buildings, the Clyde Cahill and the Carnahan building, as Amanda pointed out, it obviously houses the judges, the court staff, clerks, treatment court sheriffs, and non-court city departments in these 2 buildings, but it also services significantly the general public. I just looked up the last fiscal year of the jury report. We summoned last year 15 1,000 jurors to the to both of these buildings last year, and the year before that we summoned 20,000 jurors. If any indication of this fiscal year, we're going to be closer to the 20,000 year number this coming fiscal year. So most of the public that it services are St. Louis City residents. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Amanda.
No, that's a really important point, Judge. Thank you. So the third building that the court generally manages is the St. Louis Family Court Juvenile Division, which is at Enright and Vandevender. That there are courtrooms in that building, and they handle juvenile cases related to delinquency and child protection cases. That complex also houses our juvenile detention center, which holds detained youth temporarily until their cases are disposed. There also is an annex building with office space and meeting space, also a public building. So they're accessed by the public, litigants, law enforcement, and witnesses with business at the juvenile court. So the first project I'd like to touch on is the courtroom modernization project. The goal of this project is to update all of the courtrooms that would encompass all three buildings as a long-term goal. The updates would be for audio, video, digital, and technical infrastructure of all the courtrooms. This is a joint project. This has the support of the Circuit Attorney's Office, Public Defender's Office, and the Circuit Court. Think that the last time there was an audio upgrade to any of the courtrooms was probably in the mid-90s. The systems are breaking down. Believe it's really important to continue this effort so that the public can view and hear, as well as all parties, regardless of economic status or resources, can fairly present their case to the judges, to juries, etc. We did, the Capital Committee did award $1 million in this current fiscal year. We have taken that and run with it. We are finalizing the assessment of the RFP right now. We'll be selecting a vendor shortly, and we'll begin work on hopefully 5 to 6 courtrooms with this initial funding. So we asked the committee to fund an additional $1 million for next year to continue as a phase, the planned phase project, with an additional 5 to 6 courtrooms for the next year.
Amanda, could I jump in here just for a second as to the court modernization? I hope this doesn't sound as something that it's a matter of convenience or comfort in this. These courtrooms were built in the Carnahan in 1935 as a WPA project. The Civil Courthouse building, the Clyde Cahill building, I think it opened in 1928. So they're nearing 100 years. Both of them are nearing 100 years old, and sort of suitable for courtroom presentations, more along the lines of the Scopes trial than anything in sort of in recent in sort of what now attorneys are used to in order to practice. I would mention the court modernization goes in much deeper into sort of the infrastructure of how these courtrooms are set up. In the Carnahan building was my courtroom, Division 19, probably the largest courtroom in the circuit. It had only 2 outlets, 2 electrical outlets on either side of the courtroom to sustain not only the court's machinery, but also the machinery that the people would bring in. Is the custom, and has been the custom in recent time, for lawyers to bring their own technology into the courtroom, but we could hardly service that with the minimal outlets that we had. Recently, we just were able to get Wi-Fi or upgrade our Wi-Fi through our IT director a couple of years ago. That actually in the Carnahan building, we were piggybacking off of the circuit attorney's Wi-Fi. So we have upgraded and we want to continue to upgrade, but to try to keep up with the needs of the litigants. And one in particular, I was meeting with Gabe Gore on this, and Gabe Gore, this is a driving factor for his office. He sees it as a matter of public safety in order to be able to prosecute the cases in a manner in which satisfies the victims of the crime as well as enduring the justice. In these, he previously they have to roll in TVs and carts in order for that sort of technology. We would like to get to a place like most courthouses are now that have sort of built-in technology where that all the litigants, and particularly the circuit attorney's office, can present their case convincingly to a jury. So it is sort of an element of public safety as well, as I see it. Sorry to interrupt you, Amanda.
Oh, no. I invite the input. Thanks, Judge. So the next project we'd like to highlight is the CCB facade structural repairs. This is an ongoing project. This is a project that the Board of Public Service is managing. It is underway, originally funded without capital funds, but as the work has gone on, we have been informed there's extensive additional work needed to the structure of the building, and we were given a priority schedule, as you'll see on the slide, with a timetable. So, we ask that the committee allocate, approve, recommend additional funds, $3.5 million, to move on to be able to cover the rest of the priority 1 repairs and move into priority 2, so we can resolve these issues. Essentially, we're having leaks, roofing issues that is causing quite a bit of damage. Right, Louis? I don't know if you have anything to add.
So roofing is also a safety issue with the facade possibly falling on the public.
Yes.
And we do have roof issues from the drains, which also affect our upper floors, causes damage to the law library ceiling, things of that nature, which we're in the process of addressing.
So then the next project we'd like to highlight is the CCV revolving door replacement. We do have this beautiful revolving door on the Tucker side of that building. However, it is so outdated, we're unable to find parts to repair the revolving door. This is the main door for the public on that side of the building. It goes directly into the main court lobby. So the project would include removing the current door and replacing and repairing the floor after it's installed. You'll see that there's marble on the floor. It's all, we have to consider the architecture of the building. So we're asking for a recommendation of $80,000 in capital. So the next project highlighted is the CCV fan coil replacement. I think Louis could probably speak more to this.
Well, the fan coils that are in place, we have over 570 in the building. All these fan coils are approximately 30 years old, and the parts for them are becoming difficult to find. When it was installed, the lines for the condensate, they're very small and get clogged with gunk and everything. And we also have issues of corrosion in the piping, which is going to cause us to have to have replacement. As stated in the list, the first thing we have to do is have the contractor come in and identify and basically do a PM on all the existing fan coils to see where we stand. And there's additional pricing to address some of the issues that we foresee we will see.
So the next project I'd like to speak to is the CCB water service lines replacement. We've had replacement of the water lines in the other 2 circuit court buildings, due to flooding at various times, broken water lines. This court building, the Cahill Court building, is due for replacement. It's an aging system. We want to prevent failures. We anticipate that cost at $900,000. Did you have anything to add?
Like I said, the two buildings, we had a break at the Carnahan Courthouse approximately 7-8 years ago, which predicates us asking to do this as well. And also at the Juvenile Detention Center, we had a break 2 years ago.
The next is the CCB HVAC replacement. So the units are ending or nearing the end of life, and will be failing in the near future. So this project is proposed to remove and replace all the major HVAC units to prevent, future repairs. Projected cost is $1.3 million. The court would prioritize this one as critical. I realize that on the inventory list, it's listed as needed. Did you have anything to add on that?
No, like I said, they're nearing their service life, so that's why it's requested.
I will tell you, and Louis knows this because I almost call him every day. It's around 60 degrees in my courtroom over here in the Clyde Cahill. My clerk wears a blanket where she sits out there. It is not too long ago. I tried a case in Division 12 in the Carnahan building, and the jurors actually had to wear their coats and hats during the trial. This is badly needed, and anyone who survived the St. Louis summer realizes how badly we need air conditioning. In fact, when the air conditioning went out, I think it was either last year or the year before last, we had to actually adjourn court in the Carnahan. We couldn't conduct any of our trials or courts in there. So without, working HVAC system, the courts can't operate, in this day and age.
Thanks, Judge. So the next project on our list, we want to highlight the Cahill Court building's lighting. We're requesting funds to do retrofit of the lighting to LED. We have some pictures to demonstrate. We do have historic, beautiful historic fixtures, but the lighting in the end is inadequate. A lot of it's tied to safety, making sure everything is visual on the security cameras. There are a lot of dark places. And so retrofitting with more updated lighting would be a safety feature, as well as the visual aspect, especially in the courtrooms, being able to view evidence, folks in the gallery being able to hear and see, what's going on, on the bench, in the jury box, et cetera. So we project that cost to be done in phases. So we're asking for $190,000 for fiscal year 26 to get that project started.
We've actually had jurors complain about the lighting.
Yeah, it gets pretty dark in corners and spots, especially if, as you'll see in some of this, especially this picture of the hallway. I don't know if you'd see my cursor. Without a bright sunny day coming through the windows, it is a very, very dark hall, very dark courtrooms. I probably should have picked a cloudy day to take these pictures, but I did not. Okay, so the next one, we're moving into the Carnahan Courthouse. I broke these into the different buildings. So first is the entrance steps on the market side. This is the main entrance to the Carnahan Courthouse. So this is used by, everyone coming in and out. It's where the security checkpoint is when you go in the building. As you can see from the photographs, their repair is required. There's some deterioration. It's going to be a safety hazard if those are not repaired in a timely manner. We anticipate that total cost to be $150,000. So we request that for the next fiscal year. Did you have anything to add on that one? Okay.
Pretty obvious.
Yeah. The next is the Carnahan stack supply and waste piping replacement. Again, another system that is aging, requires replacement to prevent failures. 2 of the 26 stacks have been replaced, but we need more work to continue working on those. Again, this would be, a project where we would assess the need, prioritize, and do it in phases. Our request is for the next fiscal year, $900,000 to get that started. Moving to the next, this one, the Carnahan service elevator modernization. So this elevator has had failures. It actually recently failed in the last few weeks.
Yes, last few weeks we had a sprinkler issue at the Justice Center, which leaked into our building and went into our elevator shaft, and it fried one of our control panels. Controllers. We were fortunate to find one at a hospital that had shut down their elevator. So those parts are becoming unavailable. If we hadn't have found that, we could be out for an indefinite period of time, which would not be very good with the transport of the defendants.
Yes, so I think it's important to point out that we do use this as a service elevator, but more importantly, the sheriff and court staff, we use this to transport prisoners throughout the Carnahan building. It's a multi-level building, and this is the secure way to move prisoners to and from court, from holding cells, since it is connected to the Justice Center. I don't know, Judge, if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, that in fact, you given what Lewis had said, that's in fact what did happen, and the sheriff's department contacted me because they were saying we cannot bring prisoners over from the jail because they utilize that elevator to get to different floors. And I said, well, you're just going to have to then use the general public areas, so access the general public elevators to get the defendants up to their courtrooms. Can you imagine the sort of problems that would have created if it was a long-term problem, that we would actually having to bring defendants sometimes in handcuffs and leg irons through the general public up to their courtrooms? It would just have been not only a security problem, but just a security nightmare, but just really sort of problematic to do that. And it was a real save by Lewis that was able to do that. But I think it's just a matter of time before we're not going to find the necessary equipment to fix these elevators.
Okay, moving on to the next. The drinking fountain replacement project at Carnahan. As you can see from the photograph, I believe these are probably original to the courthouse. They do not have modern filters. Many are out of service due to age. They also they no longer have a cooling tool. A lot of them are taped off, and on, I believe, 1, 2, 3, 4, like 6 or 7 of the floors, there is no available fountain to the public in public areas. And lastly, they are not ADA compliant. So we are proposing to replace the water fountains with, modern ones with filters and bottle fillers to be more efficient, what's, safer for consumption. We project that total cost to be $150,000. We do ask for that to be included in capital funding.
And again, this is when you think about that, the number of jurors that have to pass through here and their access to being able to access water while they're in here. And it was brought up during the last court and bond meeting that Judge Mason, who is in a wheelchair, had actually pointed it out that the water fountains in the Carnahan are not are not compliable with someone who's in a wheelchair. So although that I love that photograph because it's almost like you would see that in a Ken Burns film, but it is it does show how antiquated the building has gotten.
So the next project we want to highlight is the electrical panel and circuits at the Carnahan courthouse. You'll see in the picture that's the current electrical panel. We're asking for funding for this project at $125,000 for a new electrical panel and additional circuits. We really are looking to support particularly the upgrades of the courtrooms, the additional electrical output or draw needed. So we do see this in tandem with the modernization project as needed. So I don't know, did you have anything else to add?
Oh, the picture speaks for itself. The two panels on the right are pretty ancient, and we have had issues where we've had to have city electricians come and do some work to try to get them back up and running.
Yeah, I would just say as to the panels in a later slide as it relates to the uninterruptible power supply, all our files now, we no longer have tactical files. We have no longer paper files. Everything's on the computers now. And if our power supply goes down, there is actually no way for us to conduct any business because we'll lose access to any sort of court files. Not to mention whether some courtrooms operate on a taping of a transcription of their of what happens, and so again we're not able to conduct business if we don't have an ample power supply into these electrical power supply into these courtrooms.
Okay, so the next is security upgrades. So this is one that is proposed for it says civil courts. It's the Cahill Courts building and Carnahan Courthouse. Specifically, the court is prioritizing the security camera system. There's actually two systems running at the Carnahan Courthouse that are both very much outdated. They do need upgraded, and essentially we need to go to one system. It's difficult for the sheriffs to monitor the two systems, and it's not as reliable. That is the main goal. I know that it's been proposed as a phase project over a few years. So we would ask for $250,000 for fiscal year 26 to get that started. We did have an assessment done over the last year. There are some blind spots and additional security cameras needed in both buildings pretty urgently, specifically, related to prisoner transport, loading docks, those kind of things. So that's what is encompassed in this proposal. And then just touching on the UPS, this is an information systems project to install an uninterruptible power supply. Like Judge McGraw outlined, this is essential to running our court dockets. I also want to, point out that, it would save court data, devices and hardware. So, this is a prevention measure. We estimate the cost to be $650,000 for this project. I would add that when we lost power in the past, we do have various departments of the court that are 24/7 departments, particularly at juvenile detention. And, we have youth, anywhere between 30 and 50 youth at a time who are living there. And so when we have a power outage, there is a lot of concern, a lot of effort made to prevent any failures in that building. And then rounding on the last few, So, but definitely not least, the juvenile detention elevator, again, like the Carnahan elevator, it is in desperate need of updating. We need a new elevator. This is for the secure juvenile detention center. It's a multi-level facility, and that is often used to transport youth throughout the building, throughout to residential, to school, to activities, things like that. But it's absolutely essential to the operation of the detention center. I think that it's been difficult to get parts.
That is correct.
Right?
The door operators, which if they would happen to fail, we might be dead in the water.
So the last project we wanted to highlight was the juvenile court window replacement. This would be a phase project. We foresee it being a phase project to replace the single pane aluminum windows that are original to the building. Really, it's the building can't keep up with heating and cooling. The HVAC system can't keep up with the extreme temperatures. I will say it does. I used to oversee those buildings. There is great variation in temperature to the point where I have had to send staff home because their offices were, their work environments were too cold or way too hot in the, St. Louis extremes. And when I say extremes, I'm not saying, it's not, 80 degrees. I mean, temperatures at 95 degrees or as low, last week, it was as low as 45, 50 degrees in an office. So we did want to include this in our presentation. We would like to do this again as a phase. I think the total project cost we project is $3 million, but again, we would be happy to do that in phases as well. Just to mention, there were a few 4 projects on the inventory list that we noticed. They could be ones that were previously, maybe my predecessor had submitted these. I did want to point this out to the committee, though, when you're, prioritizing projects. The CCV basement toilet rooms ventilation project, I think, in discussing with Mr. Rucker, that it may not be a critical project at this time. The sound Wi-Fi upgrade, I think it's listed at $3 million. That would not be needed if the courtroom modernization is funded. So we could probably either remove it or move it down on the list. The Carnahan revolving door replacement that's on the inventory at $130,000. We did repair that. So
we did. We replaced the major components to all the revolving doors in Carnahan several years ago.
Yeah, so that could be, we would recommend that be removed. And then lastly, the family court, the juvenile fence, gate key card stripping, outdoor yard, all those upgrades for $500,000. We were able to, with the assistance of the budget division and the comptroller's office, we were able to fund this with other funding streams, and we're close to the finish line, actually. So we would recommend that be removed as well. So I like to finish with all the ways we could save you all money after we pitch so many projects. But if any questions, we're happy to answer.
Maybe we should have started with that.
And on a good note, Judge.
Could we answer any questions?
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Judge McGraw, for that presentation, and Lewis. If any of the committee members have any questions, feel free to ask. I did have a couple that jumped out. One, I do recall anytime I get out of the building, I'm walking parallel on the Civil Courts building on Market, often saw a sinkhole there or something. Was that related to one of the projects? What is that?
We repaired that just recently with help from facilities with the city. What was it? We had some collapsed issues with the drains underneath the building.
Okay.
Actually, it was on both sides of the building, on both Chestnut and the Market Street side. But yeah, that has been repaired. Yes.
Okay, great. And then I have a second one, because the one that jumped out at me was the the $3 million for the juvenile windows. And I don't know, Rich, whether this program is still available, but I do know that in the past we've been able to get energy efficiency loans through the state of Missouri, low interest rates. I don't know if they're still offering that, but we have done that in the past. Rich, are you familiar with that building?
Yeah.
We did?
Yep. So the DOE loans that we have done in the past, the energy efficiency loans, have all been related to HVAC, optimization, variable speed motors, things along those lines. I have not seen any that have to do with windows. I can certainly ask Rick Ernst that question, but I could tell you that there have been a lot of other window projects that we have never found funding for. So I'm assuming this will fall in that same category.
Okay. The only reason why it popped in my head, because I do recall that the way those work is that you identify some energy savings over time and utilize those savings to pay off the loan at a low interest type of thing. And that's how it was arranged. But as Rich said, a lot of it has been on mechanics and things rather than on the mechanical side rather than the thing like LEDs and stuff like that rather than that. But so I was just asking that question. Okay. Let's see here. In the chat, we've got Mr. Lieberman. We use some of the union trade schools to do some of the small projects around the courts. Yeah, this is Bill's asking that question. Could we use some of the union trade schools to do some of the small projects around the courts? They provide the labor. We provide materials. I don't know, Rich, but that might be a building.
Yeah, so actually, Bill, that is a really good question. In the mayor's office, Nancy Cross, who's the director of operations, we have tried a number of times to reach out and partner with a couple of different people, folks like Rankin, the unions and so forth. And generally, it has not really worked out for us in the past. We will continue to try. I mean, if someone has a connection there and there's obviously something that we can do to work with people, we will, but keep a few things in mind. First of all, we obviously want quality work done. As the judge and Amanda and Lewis talked about, there are a lot of people that go through the building. So liability wise, for everybody working and visiting and being there, we have to ensure that the work is done properly and safely and all the above. So what that would entail is a lot of supervision from our point, which becomes a little bit toilsome. The other thing is on all government jobs, if you pay anyone, it must be on construction prevailing wages. So it's not something that we could work out some kind of arrangement and pay them for their time. It would have to be all a voluntary type thing. And typically, like I said, the trade unions have tried to work with us on a few of these things, but in the past, they just have not panned out. Does that answer your question?
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the courts?
I had a question. They were mentioning water lines breaking, and some repairs that are needed on the water lines. What's the cost comparison in terms of when we don't repair them and they break, and like how much does that end up costing, and where does that money come from if they're not repaired beforehand?
I'll start that real quick. It's usually millions of dollars, and it usually comes either from, the city's budget account, because we do have a few buildings that have insurance, but we are mostly self-insured. And I am not saying that right, and the city councilor would not be happy with me, but generally we self-insure ourselves. When Lewis was talking about the flood at the Carnahan building, the basement's filled up with water, the HVAC units, all the electrical systems, everything are in the basements of these buildings, elevators, things like that, and it destroys everything. So even when we have an insurance claim, and we do have an insurance type thing like that, our deductible on buildings right now is $500,000. So you're better off to make the investment ahead of time and not go without and have all the destruction and take the chance.
Anyone else? Okay. Again, thank you very much, Judge McGraw and Amanda and Lewis. I think as we go through these things, it's always sometimes when you see a list of numbers, it's always difficult to get a grasp of what's out there. But it's always helpful to have pictures and testimony on how this impacts in the real world to how important these things are. You've missed out on some of our previous meetings, and so there's this big long list. We've got about over $100 million of critical needs, and we've got about 20 some odd million dollars addressed. But this is very helpful and giving everyone a perspective on the courts building in particular. And so I thank you for joining us tonight.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Okay. All right. Next on the agenda, we have fleet services, and our esteemed Equipment Services Commissioner Chris Amos is here to present on our fleet service needs from the critical needs inventory. So, Chris, I'll give it to you.
Thank you, Paul. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay, well, I will endeavor to keep us on schedule here. We're starting a little late, but the bottom line on the fleet, a couple of things that will cover the entire thing, and that is that I'm trying to look, let's see, trying to do the share here, and it's not.
It's up on screen.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
The PowerPoint side is. All right,
Well,
great. I'll just do it from that one then.
Or you could do a slideshow. Yeah.
Yeah. So the fleet itself is one of those things that's easy to overlook because there's over 3,700 units of it, counting everything. Over 2,800 of those are on-road units that you're used to seeing running around. And the vehicles themselves and the off-road equipment they're used for, basically delivering citizen services is reliant upon this equipment in order to be able to be done. So the operating departments have their missions. They're responsible for the staffing and the materials part of it. I'm responsible for making sure that they have vehicles that are going to get the job done. And most of that equipment is bought through the capital process. And as Paul just pointed out, there are a lot more needs than there are dollars to fill those needs. And so it's not always an easy choice to spend money on vehicles that continue to depreciate year after year in order to keep the capabilities of those departments running. So I've divided the fleet into 4 essential groups here. I'm going to hit one each fairly quickly and then try to leave a few minutes for questions and answers at the end. In case there's anything you want to know about details, I'd be happy to share anything you want. So the D list of the St. Louis Fire Department is our smallest one. Represented here, this is the EMS part of it. So we've got 26 ambulances, like the one on the right, and that is in order to try to keep 12 on the road every day. Lately, we've only been able to keep 8 to 10 on the road every day because we have 10 replacements en route, but the first one of those 10 is not going to be delivered until May, and the last one of those 10 is going to be delivered in October. So we will be fine in the next couple of months, but the major loss for equipment, safety equipment, something about having lights and sirens on it and going through an intersection tells a certain percentage of the population, usually the ones without insurance or in stolen vehicles, hit me. So we end up losing a lot of vehicles because of that. And it's not just a 3-hour or 2-day job. When they end up in a major crash, it's down for 3-4 weeks while we have the body work done and frames straightened and equipment put back into them and all that. So it's a major problem with it. It doesn't have anything to do with how they're treated. The staffs do a good job. They're very rarely at fault for any of this, but it is a very difficult thing to keep on the road. I also put a EMS supervisor vehicle here. The common command vehicle used in the fire department is the Tahoe because it comes in a four-wheel drive version. And you might think a Tahoe is a big vehicle for this purpose, but the fact of the matter is it's the most cost-effective vehicle there is to provide this type of service for fire department. And I will say the same thing about the police department. So this is the really fancy stuff, and the fancy stuff comes with a big price tag. Pumper in the upper left-hand corner, no ladder. Those are at 1.2 million this year. They've gone up about 30% in the last 3.5 years. The Quint 75, which is basically a pumper, 5 systems like the Quint, and it has a 75-foot ladder. That one's 1.6 million now. The hook and ladders in the lower right here come in a platform version that's a little over 100 feet long and a 125-foot long ladder. And these, of course, are the service houses that are far back from the road or multi-story buildings, so they can get people down from the multi-story buildings without having to use elevators which are shut down or stairs that might be blocked. And finally, in the center bottom there is rescue squads. We have 4 of those, 2 old ones, 15 years, in order to have 2 to keep them on the road. And of course, they handle everything else. So they have the dive units and the collapse or rescue units and deal with major crashes, those kind of things. And then the fuel truck there is a placeholder for about 40 different types of support vehicles, some of which are regional assets and we don't replace with capital, but some of which have to be replaced, every 15 or 20 years. So we get a long life out of these, and of course the department takes good care of them. Probably get more washing than my car for sure.
Hey, Chris, can you go across the bottom and give the price tag on the 105, 125 Quint, the squad, and the fuel truck?
Sure. Sorry, I didn't follow that. The 105, we haven't bought for 3 years now, but the last one we bought was 2.4 million. It's a little more expensive of the 2. And the 125 million, the last 2 we bought were with the FY22 ARPA funds, and those were 2.4 2 years ago when the PO was issued. We think that they're up to 1.6, 1.7 at this point. Fortunately, we don't have to replace any hook and ladders this year or next year, so we get a little bit of a reprieve there. A squad's a very expensive piece of equipment, even without a ladder, because of the capabilities of the truck itself and all the equipment that it carries. And those, the last one we bought were 8-9 years ago, and they were over $2 billion at the time. They're probably 2.5, 2.6. A fuel truck is the cheap one of the group. It's about $600,000, and they have to have a tanker and a backup tanker in the fire department because it's the only way they can get fuel at a multi-alarm fire when the vehicles have to idle in order to keep water on the fire. So we can't use a normal contractor like we would for the rest of the fleet. We have to have the truck go in there with a firefighter who knows how to do so safely. So that's each one of the 4 segments. I've got the first page of the priority list, and this kind of tells the tale here that for the fire department, there's $2.4 million worth that would be considered critical. Now, I guess I should say something about the life of the fleet. A lot of people think that, okay, well, it depends on how often you replace the vehicles, how much it's going to cost. Well, everything the city operates, it doesn't matter if it's a small sedan or the biggest fire engine, we get every drop of service out of it that we can. So these vehicles will last in first line service 10 to 12 years, and then the better ones of those will stay in backup service for another 8 years. So generally speaking, when we buy something for the fire department, we're talking about a 20-year purchase in order to, before that one comes around again. And everything is one in, one out. The fleet doesn't grow. Paul watches me like a hawk, so I know for sure I'm not breaking that rule. And the gist of it is that if the operational budgets change and the mission changes, then we have to plan a few years ahead of time, because anything on the fire list from the time we ask for funding, like right now, until the time the truck actually hits the road in use is at least 2.5 years, sometimes longer. And COVID and the shutdown afterwards to the factories caused that to go out to as long as 4 years. So it's not something you can turn on a dime to get. You have to plan ahead. So this year, the only things that are critical that we have to do is we have to add a couple more ambulances. So the 10 we have coming in now and these 2 will give us a full set of 12 new ones. These run 24/7. They literally very rarely shut down. So our replacement cycle is only 5 years on them, but my maintenance managers tell me that it's probably better if we went to a 4-year cycle, because we're going through at least 2 engines and 1 transmission, even in 5 years. And so we have a lot of downtime and a lot of expense because of the repairs to these types of equipment. Well, the full list is, I think, in the handouts, and I do have a copy of it if anybody wants to look at it, but I think for the sake of time, we'll just move on past the recommendations. The police department gets its funding from 2 sources. Its operating budget is the primary source, and up until ARPA for FY22, we hadn't spent any capital on the police fleet, but because of the increase in the cost of the vehicles over the decade before that, the number of vehicles in the police department was dropping dangerously low, so that we were having trouble keeping enough on patrol and enough for active detectives. And so those are primarily the ones we concern ourselves about with capital, or the meat and potatoes part of the fleet, the ones that are actually doing law enforcement, as opposed to any other kind of equipment. So a mid-size sedan, of which this Impala is a good example of, and then the Tahoe is the primary patrol vehicle, which the police department calls a Scout. And then I put the picture of the Harley Davidson on there. We have fewer than 12 motorcycles now, but that kind of is placeholder for, they've got 12 prisoner transport vans. They've got a command center. They've got carts that they use for special events. They've got a whole bicycle corps that we hardly ever have to work on, but occasionally do. So for them, the overall need, even when we put desirable, that means that it's either due this year or 1 year overdue. And the needed is 1 to 3 years overdue. And for the critical, most of them are 5 or more years overdue. And you can kind of see down here the due overdue, the ones at the top of the list are pretty old. And what we'll do is we'll take something in a high use mileage or idling capacity, like a traffic control vehicle, and we'll run it in that high use for a while, 2-3 years. And then the police department will cycle that down to a less demanding role, and then that vehicle will continue in service. Many of the administrative vehicles in the fleet, building inspectors, home visit nurses and health, those types of vehicles are retired fire department, police department vehicles that still have a year or 2 worth of life left on them in those low capacity uses. So again, we hardly ever get rid of a vehicle that is drivable, much less something you'd want to put your kids in to go to college. So the total requirement for capital replacement between the operating fund and the capital fund this year needs to be in the neighborhood of $3.7 million. How that's divided between the operating budget and capital is the budget director, Paul Payne's primary purview. And so he'll decide how much they're going to get out of general fund. And then the capital committee will have to make up the difference or understand that if they can't make up the full difference to 3.7 million, that there are going to be some of these things that are going to get older without being replaced. The other city vehicles, which is kind of a catch-all, is mostly the public works fleet, but it also includes things like all the transportation for the sheriff's office, the vans, the minibuses, the excise division, public safety folks, the circuit attorney's office, the pool of vehicles that is shared by a couple thousand people downtown for the occasional use driver. And then you have the things you would think of as being public service vehicles, things like what's pictured here. And since we're coming off of snow season, I went ahead and put a full array of those vehicles there. They have single axle dump trucks and they have plows and salt spreaders on them. You notice they got 4 doors because these vehicles operate all year long. When they're not plowing snow, they're the ones like the single axles are the ones where you got a crew that goes out and will start filling the potholes as soon as they get the plows off of them from the last storm. And they also use them for paving projects, of which there's a big backlog of that that the street department will be starting on very soon. They tell me. Operationally, I don't always know what's going on, but at least I know when I have to have trucks ready. That's my main role. The tandem axle dump trucks are tandem 2 axles in the back. These are the heavy duty workers. And so they mostly work on the arterial roads like Grand and Jefferson and Tucker, those types, multi-lane roads, arterial roads, because they'll push out of 2 lanes at once and then over to the side of the road. The wheel loader loads the salt, also gathers up all the milling materials that are ground off the roads. If you ever go down a road and it's rough, you can't keep putting overlay on a road indefinitely. Eventually it would be so thick that it'd be well above the curbs. So first they have to go through and grind all that stuff off, and then they can come in and put a new overlay. The brine truck in the lower right is what's called a roll-off truck. And so normally you would see those, if not during the snow season, you'd see that with a big 50 or 60 yard dumpster on the back of it. And they use them to clean off vacant lots and to do roadway projects. And then in the winter, we have 5 of them that have these big tanks for brine, which is concentrated salt water. And that's what they pre-treat the roads and bridges with, which are the first thing to freeze. And they've been working quite well. We've only had them for 3 years now. I put the picture of the Parks Department dump truck in the lower left. This is because it's parks, it's a 4-door because they use it for a crew for everything all year long. But they also use it in the bigger parks like Forest Park and Crondelet and the other parks that have roads inside them, Tire Road, that kind of thing. Interestingly enough, this particular truck without the 4 doors is what is being procured now to try and solve the problem of plowing residential streets where the hills are a problem when it gets snow and ice, but cars park on both sides of the road, and so the bigger trucks can't make it down the street without ping-ponging off every vehicle on both sides of it. So we'll have 3 of those in here shortly, and so they'll hit the road next winter. And if they prove that they can get the job done, then I suspect we'll end up buying more of those in order to do those types of jobs. This is just a hodgepodge of all the other kinds of things that are in this fleet that are on that list. And public health outreach van, that's an inoculation van that was bought with federal ARPA funds. So some of them are specialty type vehicles like that. You can drive it around and give shots with that. Home nurses will take those out. A backhoe to dig the ditches, bury pipes, those types of things. One of our first electric vehicles, of now which we are almost at 30, I think 28. We are only buying electric vehicles when the price of the vehicle over a conventional vehicle is at or less than the cost of the electric vehicle will save over the life of the vehicle in fuel cost and in maintenance cost, because they're much simpler. So there is no engine to replace, and the transmissions are much simpler and all that. So we've got several sedans like this. We've got several full-size vans used by the trades, carpenters, plumbers, those types of folks. And we have several pickup trucks that we're using as well. That whole electric vehicle program got kicked off by the last federal administration, requiring that federal fleets had to switch some of their vehicles over to electrics. So the big US manufacturers, GM and Ford, started making them where they were affordable. But that rule has since been changed for the new administration. So at the moment, we put purchasing electric vehicles on hold until we see what's going to happen with the availability of vehicles and the price when there are fewer of them being sold, because the feds won't be buying them anymore, assuming that. The upper right-hand corner is a street sweeper, which technically is an off-road vehicle, as oddly as that is. Those things are $360,000 a piece, and they continue to go up. So there's a fleet of 24 of those, and we have to keep 12 on the road every day. And that's challenging just because of how complicated they are. Back over here on the far left middle, that is a tow truck, which is called a rollback. So this is the kind where the bed goes back, they pull it up onto the bed with a winch and then drive away with the vehicle. A lot less damage to the vehicles they're recovering, and they can recover everything, not just the ones that can be towed on one axle or not. The Zamboni is used in Forest Park at the ice rink. So there's a primary and a backup that's 25 years old. And so that's another example of a onesie vehicle we have maintenance for. A skid steer loader, the Bobcat in the middle is got a milling head on it. So that's what they use when they go around the sewer lids and railroad tracks and those kind of things when they can't use the big milling machine. More loaders. This particular one happens to be forestry, and they use it to clear vacant lots primarily and put them in those dumpsters for roll-off containers to take care of. Crane truck on the far right middle is used to put K-barriers, concrete barriers down when they need to close the lane of traffic. It's also used to put up the floodgates if the river gets too high and they're worried about the river spilling into the city. So we've got two of those to handle floodgates. And then the last two on the bottom right are an out front mower, which is about $18,000 a piece, and a tractor and pull behind mower, which the Parks Department uses in order to do the bigger fields in the parks. That one is probably going to be about $30,000 this year. So this is the tail of the tape for this one. You can see that there's $43 million worth that is either due or overdue for replacement. 26 million of that is critical, meaning 5 years overdue or more. And sometimes, we can get another year or two out of something. And so we don't replace it until we really can't fix it anymore. But this is one of those, remember that old commercial about pay me now or pay me later? Well, this is one of those pay me now or pay me later things. If we don't have enough money to replace the vehicles when they should be, or even when they're overdue, then we have to try to keep those older vehicles on the road. And sometimes, no matter how much we spend on them, we couldn't keep them running reliably, and the departments are always starved for vehicles to get their mission accomplished. There are other cases where I'm routinely required to approve $20,000 or $30,000 fixing a dump truck or something because there's no replacement on the horizon. It's absolutely necessary for the department to have. But if the vehicle was running, we couldn't get $6,000 for it at auction. So we're throwing good money after bad on the older vehicles, but that's just one of the things we have to do if we're going to keep the city's services running. And I've learned the hard way over the 30 years I've been commissioner that there is no such thing as a city vehicle that is not important. It doesn't matter if it's life or death ambulances or the grass in Forest Park is too tall. No matter what, it's going to be a problem for a certain segment of the population, and they expect that our tax dollars, of which I am a resident as well, is going to get those services delivered. So we do our best to keep them on the road, but it's getting more and more expensive every year to do so. The final segment is a special part of the other city vehicles, which is refuse. The one on the left is an alley loader's side loader, so a one-man truck, right wheel drive, right side drive, and it picks up the big alley cans for those. And basically the same truck with a claw on it is a cart truck, of which we have to have 12 cart trucks and 35 alley trucks ready every morning. And then the one on the right is a smaller drum and bag type truck. It's only a 10-yarder that the Parks Department has 2 of in order to empty the trash around picnic shelters and those types of things out of the parks where they can't use an automated truck, although it does have a lift for the drums so they don't hurt people's backs. This one has a unique feature that they solved this problem coming with refuse trucks. In 2000, we got well all at once. And then as the trucks were getting older, 8 years in primary service, another 4 or 5 in backup service, they get to the point where, like I said, the other stuff, you just can't fix it no matter how much money you throw at it. And so the trucks themselves had to be replaced more often than capital was allowing. So one of the most recent fee that we all pay as residents, the $3 a month fee, goes towards paying for refuse trucks and for video cameras for the police department to put up to stop or at least curtail the amount of dumping on vacant lots. Unfortunately, while this was enough to buy 6 or 7 refuse trucks when it was enacted, now it will only get 4 trucks. And so every year as the price of the trucks goes up, the same problem occurs. We can buy less and less. So we're recommending that in addition to the $1.8 million in dedicated funding, that the capital committee spend $2 million on refuse trucks. The only reason is because if we don't spend the 3.8 this year, then next year we have to have 10 new ones at 380,000 apiece. And so if we can't spend any this year for the extra 2 million, then next year is going to be that much harder to fund. Okay, that's a quick and dirty about the entire fleet. I really enjoyed talking with you all. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to provide you answers with them. Again, I'm not in charge of the operations with how the vehicles are used, but I can tell you what most of the vehicles are for, what they cost, and how difficult they are to keep running. I'm not hearing Paul. Paul, you're muted, I think.
Thank you, Chris. I had to unmute, but thank you for the presentation. I did see a couple questions here in the chats. The first one, Katie, what is the city's annual budget for fleet replacement? I can sort of address that. The simple answer isn't a particular set dollar amount in any given year. There are two departments that typically have some monies for fleet replacement within their operating budget. The police department has some measure of that, between $1.5 to $2 million a year for some of their replacements. And then, as Chris mentioned, the refuse division has about $1.8 million per year from the more recent increase in the fee that was allocated specifically for replacement. And that's a mix between actual cash purchases and lease purchases for replacement, for keeping the fleet replacement up to date. Although, as Chris mentioned, with rising costs, we've been falling behind in that score. But the remainder of the city's fleet is just simply how much do we have available in the capital fund to allocate towards vehicles. And now, fortunately, in the last few years, we've had, with a mix of this half of the prior year surplus monies, some ARPA monies, and other sources, we've had a little bit more capital than usual in the last few years. But still, it's only been a token amount for fleet replacement, and I'm sure Chris could tell you any dollar amount's welcome, but it's not addressing the full replacement needs that we have.
Exactly. It's difficult to carve money out for something that's worth less the day you drive it onto the road. I mean, it's rapidly depreciating. It gets worn out, and it's unfortunately, it's one of those necessary evils. If you want to perform services with vehicles, you have to have reliable vehicles.
And Bill, you had a question. Could we finance some of these large purchases over time instead of buying outright and spread the cost over a couple of years and maybe get more for the money? Actually, that's a good question. We actually do that, and we have about going back about 5 years or so, because of that very reason. Because of the limited funds, we had been doing lease purchase agreements where we try to finance not more than over, let's say, 7 years. You definitely don't want to go over the lifespan or the stated lifespan of the vehicle, and we do that, and that's a way of stretching some dollars. We can do that. We haven't in recent years simply because we didn't want to issue debt at a time when you actually had cash available. But that is certainly something that we're going to have to return to as some of these other sources dry up. But again, based on whatever the capital fund has available, that lease debt purchase amount, obviously, because it'll tie up your funds for a certain number of years, and so we have to gauge that with future capital budgets. Any other questions for Chris on fleet? Okay, very good. Well, this was our last presentation that we've had scheduled for this series of presentations. So far, I mean, so you have heard our overview of the capital needs inventory. You've heard from parks and recreation and their needs of facilities. You've also heard from BPS on their streets projects, the recommendations for the Complete Streets Committee, as well as some other items within the streets category. We've also just delved into building needs, particularly with the courts, and then some of these fleet needs. And so hopefully this gives you a pretty good picture of some of the needs from the capital the city has citywide, and the varied needs they are. And as I mentioned, we have over $100 million of critical needs and some $20+ million to allocate for that. And so what I'd like to do, and then what we've done in the past, for those who have been members of this committee in the past, what I've done is, now that we've sort of completed our formal presentations, to gauge where the committee sees priorities and things of that nature. So what I'd like to do is reach out to you all with a survey that gives you the opportunity to give us your priorities on these projects, as well as suggest if there's items that we have not discussed that you'd like to see addressed, so that we can take that back to the Capital Committee, which will meet later in March, and give them some input from what you've seen here presented to you over these last few weeks. So that's sort of the plan. So we wouldn't have any additional formal meetings after tonight, but we would reach out to you with some surveys and to get some where you guys are at and where and just sort of get some feedback from you all. So that's what we have going forward. I do want to point out that if you go on the city's website, we do have particularly like with last week's presentation, there are some things with maps which show you where the streets are located within the city that we're talking about, and the map overall on the city's capital needs. If I could share, let me see. I'll share that real quickly. Let me see here. You see that this is a map that folks at PDA did for us, just putting everything on the grid to show you where these projects are located. I also have one, I believe, that was from the Complete Streets map. If you can see that, that just identifies where all those projects are also located. All of this material, including tonight, this is from last week's presentation. This is also on the website. Tonight's presentations are also posted on the agenda for tonight's meeting, so you'll be able to review all of that. And of course, the video of the meetings are also all posted on the website. So, unless are there any other questions out there or any issues? Okay, very good. Actually, we're finishing pretty close on time. So I thank you very much for your participation in tonight's meeting. You should be hearing from us next week on that survey that we plan to issue to the committee members. And please respond to that so as we get as much information from you all to provide the Capital Committee with your input so that we can hopefully get some projects done this year. Thank you again, and have a good evening.